can a state, or is because the church was taking actions that were deleterious to the public good. So we have many. Okay, I began my talk last time referring to from 1979, Redemptor Hominis, Christ the Redeemer of humanity, serving another. When we are serving our brothers and sisters, when we are serving the Lord, when your life for another, the law of the gift. When we give ourselves, that's when good things happen. And that's in the exercise of authority and power. We have to understand power as real power is understood as service, similar to service that Christ demonstrated, and generous service. And we see that in their lives. I talked last week about mission, or communion and service, that we are called to enter into deep communion with the living God, and from also exercise a life of mission, bringing that love of God into the world, serving God and serving our neighbor extra and ad extra. First we look at the nature of the church, and then we look at the nature of the church vis-a-vis the world for going out as missionary disciples. How do we engage the world in a way that's consistent with our faith? Authentic power as understood as service for the good of the other more than anything else. I believe that state and religion, nation and faith remain in their interpreted. However, talking about different spheres, but spheres that interact for the common good. On people, if you don't examine and confront the ecclesial culture that was sponsored by National Leadership Roundtable, great conference, brought about 250 people of restorative justice and healing, but also the harm that will continue to occur unless our ecclesial harm and disparities that are laid bare, which I think offend God's justice. God more and live in that apathetic place that I talked about Pope Francis mentioning last time. This is what I'm excited about. I haven't seen a lot of other things written in this area, and so this is my culture gets off the tracks. They're actually very similar dynamics. And then it produces also similar dynamics, trying to understand where these connection points are. Now, this thesis relies on Aristotle, to the great thought of Aristotle. Now, the Oxford biographer Barnes puts it this way in the opening chapters. In political philosophy, in law, in justice, refers back in some to this thesis. Order in the personal soul, a rightly ordered soul, happiness as contentment, but happiness as deep fulfillment. And it comes from a life that has a soul virtues for two reasons. One is it moderates the other three virtues. It keeps them in right order. This is one of the reasons why Aristotle advises for philosopher kings. So a philosopher king is for the good of the people they serve. Now, we don't have philosopher kings, and he might have been onto something. Order in the polis, in the city. Disorder in the collective that person is called to serve, ecclesial culture. In times of decadence, to borrow Ross Douthat's description of the United States, Catholicism in the West, it's also true there. A long, slow decline. Now, he says a disjunctive of, said the pandemic might be that for American culture. My hope and the hope of trotting the same path. We have to look at our culture that contributes to this harm. And what now enter the clergy abuse crisis, as I said, in the pandemic. So it's not unlike a stress test. And I'm clearly out of shape. Well, it's revealing all sorts of things that are potentially wrong. We are going not inclusive, a culture that is too clerical, right, that continues to produce harm. And so it also harkens to mind the warning at the beginning of our republic that a vast So it's not surprising that both Pope Francis and people that you're serving. And I think Pope Francis has ushered in a good populism. And I'll leave it to what you're trying to serve. When that doesn't happen, that's when people get upset. in America, similar mistakes, not all of them, but some of them, without an understanding that the laity are fed up and also have understood as service. I think that's absolutely essential for both church culture and our. Now, one of the things that we've seen in America and in other places is we have had too many men of the institution. Now, you should want your bishop to be loyal to the church, absolutely. And what happens is these men who may not have Christ at the center of their life, the institution fall back on preserving their own sense of safety and self-interest and the interest of the institution. And that it is not consistent with the good of the church. Now, what's the American, and I would say again, the popes, Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, of a man living in freedom. What's the American corollary? Self-interested politicians who think their main interest, rather than trying to find the common good for the people. Now, in both cases of a soul that's not rightly ordered. And so therefore that disorder in the soul manifests itself outwardly. What do I mean by ideology? Those who are ideologues or enter into ideology have a or whatever they want to call it. And so this ideological construct is like, to borrow Pope Benedict, the church in the extremes of traditionalist Catholics on the way right side, and on the right, it's sometimes also a relativistic approach to Catholic social teaching, but also abuse crisis to wound as a weapon, rather than trying to find common ground. We have ideology, and we see this in the federal government. They use this crisis to score political points, common good, because people are living from ideological prisms and bunkers, and so you don't. I think the governor Mandoni from Rhode Island, notwithstanding her DeWine in Ohio, they are not ideologues. They try to promote the common good. There's a new culture of leadership that raises up church leaders and politicians who are virtuous, wise, humble, and bold. So I got to keep moving here. What's at the center? In these situations for the church, authority is the American people. That's where the power comes from. What happens is these folks who do not keep the American people in the center as sovereign power on the side of the American culture, they suffer harm because they're forgotten about. It's the poor and the marginalized. It's the victim of clergy abuse. And to American culture, so not only are there cultural corollaries in terms of the bold leadership, so we need to create a new culture in the American culture that leaders who have rightly ordered souls and can serve well the common good. We need that in the church side that those leaders are to foster. They do it in a way that's systematic, in a way that's organized. Catholic social teaching has a lot of important good things to say about the exercise of authority, of independence. It's our founding narrative, our founding values. These always have to be attended to, acting out of unhealed wounds in both church and state. And that ends up causing harm. An accompaniment, the corollary in the American side, which David Brooks talks about, similarly and connected to that is a special concern for those on the margins, a preferential need. And then holding things in dialectic tension, both on the American side, say faith and reason for reform, both in the church and also our nation. We have to play good and also our public square for faith-based ethic as well. So for the church, really demanding what is your due, a church culture that is not going to be transformed by apathetic, lukewarm Christians. We have to encounter a well-ordered soul and also be a life that is attractive to others. That's really what evangelization looks like. 2 to 3 book studies during the summer as well. Thanks to Josh Zenner and Sarah Moon for lives. God loves you.